In the early hours of September 10, 2025, Russian drones launched during attacks on Ukraine veered into Polish airspace, marking a dangerous escalation. These drones, initially intended to target Ukrainian positions, strayed off course and entered the sovereign airspace of Poland, a NATO member. The incident occurred under the cover of darkness, adding to the tension and confusion on the ground. This was no minor incident. It was a direct breach of a NATO member's territory, forcing the alliance to respond militarily against Russian assets for the first time since the Ukraine invasion began. The breach triggered an immediate and robust response from NATO forces stationed in Eastern Europe. Soldiers were put on high alert, and military hardware was mobilized to counter any further threats. The incursion shattered the illusion that the war in Ukraine was contained, as air raid sirens sounded in Polish towns and villages. The sound of sirens brought fear and uncertainty to the residents who had hoped the conflict would remain distant. Streets emptied as people sought shelter and emergency services scrambled to respond to potential threats. The drones, Russian versions of the Iranian Shahed, raised urgent questions. Was this a navigational error, or a calculated Kremlin probe to test NATO's resolve? Analysts and military experts examined the wreckage, trying to determine the intent behind the incursion. The sophisticated technology of these drones suggested a level of precision that made a simple error seem unlikely. NATO's deterrence was put to the test, exposing vulnerabilities and forcing leaders in Warsaw, Brussels, and Washington to confront a scenario they had long feared. High-level meetings were convened to discuss the appropriate response, with world leaders joining via video conference to coordinate their actions. The stakes were high, and the decisions made in these moments would have far-reaching consequences. One thing was clear: a line had been crossed, and NATO now faced a critical decision on how to respond. The alliance's credibility and the security of its member states were on the line. The world watched closely as NATO deliberated its next move, knowing that the outcome could redefine the balance of power in the region. The scale of the incursion was staggering. Never before had Poland, or indeed any NATO member, faced such a brazen and coordinated aerial violation in recent memory. The skies above the border were suddenly alive with the hum of engines and the flicker of radar screens, as military personnel scrambled to respond. In just 24 hours, 19 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, overwhelming local defenses and sending shockwaves through European security circles. The sheer number and timing of the drones suggested a deliberate attempt to test the limits of Poland's and NATO's preparedness. Investigators later discovered drone fragments at 16 separate sites, some scattered more than 500 kilometers inside Polish territory. Several of these drones appeared to be on direct trajectories toward a strategically important NATO military base, raising urgent questions about the true intent behind the operation. Many of the drones were traced back to launch sites in Belarus, a close Russian ally. This not only complicated the diplomatic situation but also fueled suspicions that the incursion was a calculated move, either to probe NATO's defenses or to send a chilling message to the alliance. Miraculously, there were no casualties. However, the debris from one drone destroyed a civilian home in the quiet village of Wyriki, shattering the sense of safety for ordinary Poles and bringing the distant war in Ukraine right to NATO's doorstep. Forensic teams quickly identified the wreckage as belonging to Russian-operated Shahed drone variants, a type already infamous for their use in Ukraine. This left little doubt about Moscow's direct involvement and intentions. The incident sent shockwaves through NATO headquarters. Officials were stunned by the effectiveness of these cheap, hard-to-detect drones, which managed to slip past traditional air defense systems and expose critical vulnerabilities in the alliance's security posture. The message from Moscow was unmistakable. NATO's vigilance, unity, and political will were being put to the test. Analysts debated whether this was a warning, a provocation, or the start of a new phase in hybrid warfare. In the aftermath, Polish President Karol Nawrocki addressed the nation, assuring citizens that both Poland and the alliance had passed this critical test. Yet, beneath the official statements, a sense of unease lingered, as leaders grappled with the implications of this new kind of threat. The incident forced NATO to urgently reassess its readiness for unconventional threats, sparking new debates about defense spending, intelligence sharing, and the future of collective security in an era of rapidly evolving technology. As the drones crossed from Belarus, NATO's air defense network sprang into action. Dutch F-35S and F-16S scrambled, joined by helicopters and ground-based Patriot missile batteries, forming a rapid multinational response. For the first time since the Ukraine war began, NATO air power engaged hostile targets within Allied borders, with every move weighed for escalation risk. The drones were intercepted without friendly or civilian casualties, a testament to NATO's professionalism. In response, Poland imposed a temporary no-fly zone in the east, prioritizing military operations and airspace security. The incident underscored Warsaw's resolve to defend its territory and signaled NATO's readiness to counter further provocations. The alliance's integrated command structure proved its value in a real-world crisis. The stakes had never been higher for NATO's eastern flank. As NATO fighter jets maintained a vigilant watch over Eastern Europe, the tension in the air was unmistakable. The skies, once symbols of peace, now echoed with the roar of engines, underscoring the seriousness of the unfolding crisis. In response to the alarming breach, Poland made a decisive move by invoking Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, a rarely used but powerful diplomatic tool. This action called for urgent consultations with NATO allies, signaling the gravity of the situation and the need for immediate collective attention. Unlike Article 5, which mandates a military response, Article 4 does not trigger automatic action. Instead, it serves as a formal request for allies to discuss threats and coordinate their response at the highest political level. By elevating the issue to the North Atlantic Council, Poland ensured that its concerns would be addressed with utmost seriousness and urgency. The invocation of Article 4 made it clear that Poland viewed the drone incursion as a grave threat to its national security and potentially to the stability of the entire alliance. In Brussels, the North Atlantic Council convened an emergency meeting, bringing together top diplomats and military leaders from across the alliance. All 32 member states were present, united in their condemnation of Russia's actions and determined to present a strong, coordinated front. Allies expressed unwavering solidarity with Poland, pledging support and cooperation in the face of this provocation. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte addressed the world, affirming that the alliance would take all necessary measures to guarantee the security of every member state. With Article 4 invoked, what began as a national emergency for Poland was now a collective challenge for NATO, demanding unity and decisive action. The alliance's unity and resolve were on full display, as member nations stood shoulder to shoulder in defense of shared values and security. With the world watching, NATO began to coordinate its response, setting the stage for a decisive answer to Russia's provocation and reaffirming its commitment to collective defense. The world reacted swiftly to the drone incursion. Polish leaders called it a deliberate provocation, while the US reaffirmed its commitment to Poland's security, highlighting the presence of 10,000 US troops in the country. EU leaders condemned the breach as a blatant violation of sovereignty, with the European Commission and Foreign Policy Chief denouncing Russia's reckless escalation. Russia and Belarus denied responsibility, blaming navigational errors and electronic jamming, claims dismissed by Western officials as disinformation. The incident united NATO and EU voices, underscoring the seriousness of the threat. The Kremlin's denials only deepened Western resolve. The message was clear: further provocations would not go unanswered. Less than a week after the Polish incursion, a Russian drone breached Romanian airspace detected by F-16S during a routine patrol. The drone, part of attacks near the Danube, confirmed a pattern Russian military hardware was repeatedly violating NATO airspace. No damage occurred, but the incident triggered alarm in Bucharest, renewed calls for stronger air defenses along NATO's southeastern flank. The back-to-back breaches showed the threat extended from the Baltics to the Black Sea. Russia appeared to be systematically testing NATO's defenses and response times. These incidents were not accidents, they were part of Russia's evolving hybrid warfare strategy. NATO now faced a new era of persistent low-cost provocations. The interceptions exposed a costly dilemma. NATO used multi-million-dollar jets and missiles to down drones worth only thousands. Experts warned this model was unsustainable. Swarms of cheap drones could drain air defense budgets and exploit technological gaps. NATO's systems, designed for high-speed threats, struggled with small, low-flying drones. The Polish incident was a wake-up call. The alliance's shield had a critical vulnerability. Military leaders defended the response but acknowledged the need for new, cost-effective solutions: lasers, jammers, and specialized anti-drone tech. Analysts believe Russia used the incursion to gather intelligence on NATO's defenses, forcing the alliance to reveal its playbook. Cheap drones had forced NATO to show its hand. The strategic challenge was clear: adapt or risk being outmaneuvered. The September drone incursions forced NATO to confront a new reality. The alliance must urgently invest in counter-drone systems, advanced radar, jammers, and directed energy weapons to close technological gaps. Clearer rules of engagement are needed to respond decisively to future provocations without risking escalation. NATO will likely strengthen its eastern flank, deploying more fighters, air defenses, and surveillance assets. The message to Moscow: NATO's commitment to its members is ironclad. The crisis is a stark reminder that Europe's security is tied to Ukraine's fate, and vigilance is now the permanent price of peace. The events of September 2025 were a test, one that will shape NATO's mission for years to come.